Hello everyone and welcome to Azam Sharp YouTube channel. And in this video, you'll be learning how to create a multi-step form using SwiftUI. So here is our application that we're filling out. This is for FEMA application where you're telling FEMA that what were the damages to your house. So I'm going to enter some information. I can say John Doe, that's my name, and next. And now you can see the previous button also appears, so you can go to the previous screen and edit the information if you want. The type of damage, let's say hurricane damage. Next, address information, some sort of an address that you have, which is Richmond Avenue. Next, and then you can review the information and finally submit it. All right. So this is the multi-step application flow that we'll be building in this video. Let's go ahead and get started. So now that you have seen that what we'll be building in this video, let's go ahead and get started. You can see that I have my main view, which I'm calling it FEMA application screen. And currently it just contains text which says FEMA application, nothing much. The first thing we need to create is some sort of a model that can hold the information that we're collecting. This can be first name, last name, damage, as well as the address. Now, I'm just going to write the code over here because it's easier to share, but you can create different files for each of the entity, each of the model that I'm building. So we'll create a FEMA insurance application, right? I mean, it can be FEMA application, it can be FEMA, well, it will be a FEMA application. So I'll just call it FEMA application, all right? And we'll have a couple of different things we're going to capture. We're going to capture first name, last name, we're going to capture damage, and we're going to capture the address. Now, if your application is much more complicated, like maybe for personal information, you're asking for first name, last name, date of birth, social security, middle name, email, other stuff, then instead of putting all of these things as individual primitive properties, you can create nested structures like personal, and this can be damage, this can be address, which is zip code, street. You know what I'm saying? So you can create those things if you want to. Like, to give you an example, you can create an address structure that will represent an address, and that can be, let's say, street. And then you can use street, you can use city, and so on. And instead of the address being a string over here, you can use the address structure, and you can initialize it as an address structure. Or in this case, I guess since we don't really have anything, well, I guess you can initialize it because all of them are getting like initial values that are empty string. But I'm just trying to keep things simple. So instead of using the address structure, I'm just going to use the address as a string. And if you have much complicated form, much bigger form, then you should be using address. Maybe damage will be another struct. Maybe first name, last name, and all that stuff can be personal struct, and so on. Okay, so we have this FEMA application. The next thing we want to define are application steps. And since application steps are, like there are a number of application steps, an exact number, we can go ahead and expose it as enum. So personal, damage, address, and then in the end you will have a review. Okay. All right. So this is all fine. The next thing we need to do is we'll go to our FEMA application screen and we will just start with the step. So state private var current step, and current step will be of type step. What is it called? Application step? Okay, so application step. And we'll start with personal information. So we'll say personal. The other thing that we want to do is we want to create an object of FEMA applications. Right now, we just created a struct which contains these 4 properties, but we also need to populate these things, right? So we'll create a struct. We'll call it FEMA application, and we'll initialize it as FEMA application. If you want to change the name of the application to something else, maybe this is an insurance application, maybe this is like some sort of a renewal of a driver license application, and it has a multi-step process. So you can do that also. All right, so we have the FEMA application, we have the step. Now we will have to create different views for gathering this information, right? So the thing that I can do over here is I can simply go ahead and I can say switch the current step. And for each of the step that I'm making, I can return a particular view. So for here, I'm just going to use personal. Obviously, we're going to change these views. Over here, I'm going to use damage. And we will change these to actual views. And over here, we'll say review. Now you can even move this out to a separate function or a separate view like FEMA application view or something, but right now it's okay. Since we have set our application current step to be personal, this means personal is going to get invoked, and that is the reason that we are displaying the text personal. Now if I change this to something else, let's say damage, then you'll see that the view is now going to show damage. Okay, we'll start with personal because that's the first thing we need to do. The next thing we want to do is to create these views. I mean, currently these views are just text views. We can't really get any information from them. It's basically just for display. So how does our personal view look like, right? So let's go ahead and create a view. Struct personal information view with a body, and we'll return something. We'll have a form, and in the form we will ask the person to do something. But let's go ahead and send that information. So show that view. So I'll say personal information view. So this view is getting displayed, but you can see that the view doesn't really render anything apart from the form. So what we need to do is the personal information view is interested in the first name and the last name. So what we can do is we can pass it. Let's just go ahead and say FEMA application, and we can pass it the FEMA application that we build, which is a state variable. Now, the personal information view doesn't really take in anything, so we can use binding var FEMA application, FEMA application. Okay, so you might be wondering, hold on a second, we're passing the entire FEMA application struct over here. Shouldn't we be passing only the thing that the personal information view needs? And you are 100% correct. That is exactly what I was saying before, that personal information is only interested in personal. So personal. So in the end, you can do something like this also. I mean, we don't really have any struct or a property in the FEMA application that is called personal. So this will be a much nicer approach if you want to. All right. So this means that we will have to change this part. Instead of saying first name and last name, we can go ahead and create personal and maybe move this information in there. And then expose personal over here, personal. And we'll simply create personal. All right. Now, personal information view is only taking the personal information, so we should probably call it personal. And this will be really a good idea to do if you are building a much larger form. In this form, with only 4 different properties, it's kind of like an overkill what we're doing, but I'll still show you that how you can do that. All right, so we got the personal, that's fine. And what should we do in the form? Well, this is where the person can enter the information, right? So we'll say enter first name, and it's going to go into personal.firstname. And we can use the same approach by saying last name, and it can be last name. Great. Okay, that's pretty good, right? What other things do we need to do? Well, when we created this form, there are a couple of different things that are missing. Right now, the form, first of all, doesn't really have any title. So that's one thing. You can see that there's no title for the form. So the user might say, okay, which part of the form I'm on? I mean, is it, how many steps are there? Do I have to enter this? Do I have to enter that? So one thing we can do is we can go to our current step. Let's see, which is application steps. Let's see over here. So we are creating these application step. What we can do is change this a little bit. All right. Since we will have like different kind of steps, what we can do is let's change this name to, this is actually fine. All these cases are fine, but we can expand that a little bit, right? We can expand that by adding a property called title. And we can perform a switch on the title, on the self, which is already an enum. So we're basically looking at the application step, and we're performing a switch on the application step. Based on the case, we're going to return some sort of information, basically a string title. And since we already have access to the current step, we can set the title pretty easily now by saying navigation title, which will be current step dot title. And since the current step right now is personal, it sets the title as personal information, which is pretty good, right? The next thing that we want to do is to show the buttons, like the previous button or the next button. Now, if I want to create that shouldn't be that hard to create. Let's go, so over here we have the at stack and all that. That is perfectly fine. We can go ahead and say at stack. And we can create previous. Let's see if the previous button comes in. Okay, previous, right at the bottom you can see previous. And I can use the same approach, and I can create another button called next. Now, since this is our first step, we don't really have to display the previous step or the previous option, right? We only have to display the next option. So how can we accomplish that? This is something that we can also do in our application step. Just like we're exposing a property called title, we can expose another property called previous, which is going to return application step. There we go. And again, we can go ahead and perform a switch on the enum, which is the application step. So switch on the self itself. If it's personal, then return nil. All right. If it's personal, if the case is personal, then there is no previous step. So just return nil. If it's damage, return personal. If it's address, return damage. If it's review, return address, because it's previous, right? Next, we can try to use this scenario over here. We don't even want to display the previous part of it, because if it's null, it's null. So if let previous step, okay, so if there is a previous step, then we can say that the current step equals to the previous step. Or I should probably call it previous step, just to be a little bit more descriptive. So right now you can see that in the person information, we're not displaying the previous step. So that's pretty good. What about the next one over here? What should we do with the next step, right? Well, there are a number of things we'll have to check over here. We can say over here, if let next step, we can use the same exact technique. Current step dot, we don't really have a next over here, but if we did, we should be able to do it something like this. So this means that just like the previous property that we have created, we will also create the next property. And next and previous are pretty similar. So let me go ahead and copy some parts of it. There we go. This will be application step. And you can see that in the next step, if the case is personal, the next step is damage. If the case is damage, then the next step is address. If the case is address, the next step is review. If the case is review, well, that is the last step. So the case, that's nothing, it's nil. There is no next step after the review. And that is exactly what we will be able to do and use for our next step. So I'll say current step equals to next step. All right. Let's see how this works. Currently, we are on the personal information screen. That's the personal step. Next, okay, we can see that we're in the damage information. And then after the review, it doesn't really do anything. It's just, it's just the last step. Okay. So this is working pretty good. We already created the personal information view. And just like the personal information view, we should be able to create a damage view. We should be able to create the address view and the review view. But for damage view, again, it would be a good idea probably if you have a lot of properties for the damage, like maybe, the type of the damage, maybe the cost of the damage, interior damage versus exterior damage, hail, wind, hurricane, whatever kind of a damage, we can create a damage over here. And over here, we can just say, kind of like just provide us the text of the damage, and we can create should be damage, D-A-M-A-G-E. And now, now we can use that to create damage. There we go. And the same thing we can do with the address. Now, again, this technique of creating these separate structs for personal, damage, and address, they are more appropriate for scenarios where you have a lot more information that you're collecting for personal, damage, and address. Right now, again, I'm going to repeat it, it's an overkill what I'm trying to do. Street, which will be something like that, and we can change this to address, and we can initialize the address. Okay, so there we go. So now we have created personal, damage, and address. And when we create these views, just like we created the personal information view, when we create the damage view, that damage view will only be interested in the damage struct. So let me go ahead and create it over here. And instead of passing in the insurance application, we can simply pass the damage. And then we can say damage.text. Actually, I don't really like the text. Let's see if I can change it to something else, like maybe I can say type, because it's kind of like a type of damage. Enter damage type. Hurricane, wind, hail, these kind of damages. And over here in the damage, we can say damage and then pass in FEMA application.damage. Now, other thing to note is that I'm not really using or pushing different navigation views into a navigation controller. That technique is perfectly fine. If you want to use that, you definitely can. I'm just showing you a little bit of a different way of doing things. Now, this might not be the way that you are instructed by your team lead to do things, or maybe the designer, you want to push a navigation controller or you want to use a navigation controller. That is perfectly fine. I'm just showing you that you can use this technique also. All right. What about the address view? Well, the same thing. With the address view, we're going to create the address view. And we're going to pass in the address. And this will be address.street. There we go. Let's go ahead and say address view. Pass in the address, which will be FEMA-application.address. Perfect. And now finally the review part of it. Review is like where you will display all the information. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy the review view. We're going to change this a little bit because this is going to be a FEMA application that we're passing. So in the review view, we're not really passing binding because we're not really changing anything, right? So that's why we're passing the whole application, FEMA application. And if I want to display something related to the review, so FEMA application.personal.firstname, I can say FEMA application.personal.lastname, FEMA application.damage.type of damage, and then FEMA application.address.street. All right. And this will be the review part. So we can say over here, review view, and we can pass in not the binding, but the actual struct without the binding to that. All right. Okay, let's go ahead and test it out. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to enter some information. John Doe. John will be the first name, I guess, and Doe will be the last name. Next, type of damage. Okay, type of damage was hurricane. Next, address, some sort of an address. So let's say Richmond Avenue. Okay, review. You can see all the information in the review. That looks pretty good. Now, after the review, what you need to do is you can go previous, but you want to submit, right? So how can we do that? Now, again, there are multiple ways of doing that. One of the things that we can do is changing how the text is displayed. All right, so I'll say button. If the current step is equals to review, then change the text to submit, or else change it to next. Now this is the button. So in the button now, I'm going to go ahead and do something. Let's do that. If the current step is review, then print submit. So this is where you will submit it. Else if let next step, and this is where we will do. We were doing this before anyways. So next step. This will be, yeah, again, I'm calling it next, not next. I'll call it next step. Next step. There we go. All right. Let's go ahead and run this again. John Doe. Next. Type of damage, hail damage. Next. Address 1200 Richmond Avenue. Next is the review screen. Okay, everything looks good. Submit. All right. And you can see that the submit should be fired. You can see right there, it is coming from when the review is submit, or the current step is submit. So with this code, we were able to build easily our multi-step form. Now, if you want to extract this out into a separate view, like FEMA application view, that is perfectly fine. Maybe you want to reuse it, so you can do that. All right. So this is how you will build your multi-step form. In one way, I mean, there are some other ways available also. Obviously, you can use the navigation controller and push different views with different screens in the navigation controller. That is fine. If you don't want to do that, this is one of the ways. So hopefully you have enjoyed this, and thank you very much. If you like this video and want to support my channel, then the best way would be to check out my website, azamsharp.school. This is where I host all of my courses, and as well as live workshops. Let's go ahead and check out these courses. You can see I have courses on Supabase for iOS developers. So this course is currently, I'm working on it, but still a lot of different sections are available. You have courses on SwiftUI architecture, very, very popular course if you want to learn about the correct way of building SwiftUI application. If you are interested in Swift data, I have courses on Swift data 2, core data, reactive programming, full stack iOS development for Vapor if you want to become a full stack developer and want to learn how to use Swift on the server, test-driven development, Reality Kit, async and await, and a lot more courses. And also check out the workshops. I mean, I've just added a number of workshops. The earliest workshop coming up will be on August 17 on machine learning. Now, these are live workshops. These are around like 2.5 to 3 hours long, and they are very, very hands-on. I mean, you will be coding all the way in the workshop, and we will be creating some real applications. So you can see the introduction to server-side Swift workshop is coming up. We have the Create ML workshop, Swift data fundamentals, as well as testing, and then Supabase also. So make sure that you are enrolled in these workshops. It's a small gathering when we're learning about these things in the workshop. So it's a small setting, and you get one-to-one kind of like access to me. All right. So check out azamsharp.school. The link will be right there in the description. Thank you so much.